Hi everyone, David Yankee from Hal Leonard, and it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Randall Faber. Dr. Faber really doesn't need an introduction since most of you know him as the co-creator and co-author of the best-selling Piano Adventures teaching method, which has grown globally and is now published in over 10 languages. What you may not know is Dr. Faber holds 3 degrees from the University of Michigan, a PhD in Education and Human Development from Vanderbilt University, and he's the 2019 recipient of the Roland Lifetime Achievement Award in Education. When he's not teaching and lecturing, you can hear him perform as a Steinway artist. Making music is an adventure, so thank you for tuning in and joining us for the adventure of music making with Dr. Randall Faber.
Welcome to the NAMM Show. I'm Randall Faber, and this is the adventure of music making. In ancient times, the adventure journey was thought to be predetermined by fate. Imagine Ulysses, for example, setting sail on his adventure, his challenges and trials at sea, all playing out what was meant to come. Nowadays, of course, we think more in terms of an unknown future, but we don't set sail blindly in the hands of luck. We plan the path ahead, we put in focused effort, and we develop a support network of friends and coaches and teachers. Consider the word Advent, which is part of the word adventure. Advent means what is about to come, what is about to be fulfilled. And this is something we can take personally because we can look at what is that Advent, that upcoming adventure of one's own career in music making. What we really have is your adventure of music making is situated in the here and now, but at the trajectory of the path ahead. The concept of adventure is instructive here because it helps us shape the trajectory. It implies a jumping into the challenge, an overcoming of the obstacles, a building the scar tissue, and learning new skills. Now, that's quite a handful or a mouthful, and indeed, it's encouraging us to put in the hard work of building skill. One little point, though, is that sometimes I find people grasping that hard work ethic so much that they say, I'm going to learn music theory, I'm going to learn my scales, I'm going to learn my technique, and then I'm going to be making music. And I encourage us instead to think of the music making as something that's intertwined with all levels of the skill development. Think that if music making is that expression from the heart, expression from the soul, and that inspiration of creativity. And this needs to be practiced, just like we need to practice our scales. So today I'm going to help us look at that interweaving of 2 tracks. One track is the development of our tool set, our skills, if you will. And the other track is how do we take in the muse? How do we be inspired and how do we be expressive? Certainly art takes courage. We might say that we have to approach creativity from the gut. In fact, think of that word adventure. If we find the root of the word, we find it as vent, V-E-N-T. Ad is the prefix here, and ad means to or facing, but vent means the belly, it means the gut. You can think of the word ventral and dorsal and anatomical terms. For instance, a porpoise would have a dorsal fin that refers to the back fin, and a ventral fin would be the belly fin. Or in structures of the brain or organs in the body, the ventral would be the side that's underneath. So why does this word adventure have vent in it? What is this meaning? Well, the belly is the undefended part. It's the vulnerability. It's the vulnerable side. So when we face with the belly, so to speak, faced with the ventral, then we're exposed, vulnerable, and being courageous. So just as we talked about this Ulysses adventure, the adventure of music making invites us to be courageous with our expression, courageous with our music making and creativity. I'd like to suggest that maybe to do so, we think of this term, a brain bypass. Instead of thinking our way through music, instead, let's set our toolkit aside and approach music from the gut. To illustrate, let's give a listen to Franz Liszt's The Opening of the Mephisto Waltz. Now, certainly when Liszt was composing this, he wasn't thinking music theory. We're not hearing 1 and 5 chords. He wasn't thinking about E minor and E minor 9. Undoubtedly, he was creating from the gut. He's thinking about story. This is the Mephisto Waltz, so it's the devil tuning up the violin. And indeed, we hear the open fifths here of the strings of the violin, and he's just transposed that and continues to add more fifths and more excitement, creating from the gut, if you will. Let's do something similar here. We're going to turn off the tool set, but go from the gut. And instead of tuning up the violin, what if you're tuning up on the guitar strings? So that would give us, instead of the fifths, we're going to go up in fourths. And then we get our 1/3 there, and then back to another fourth. So let's play with that a bit. Or flip it upside down and coming down. And of course, there aren't right notes and wrong notes in something like this. All we're trying to do is capture our passion and inspiration, bypass our thinking, and get right into some playing. This is something that I think can be quite workable in terms of a mindset for approaching music making. One's apt to think that creativity means confidence, and we're going to say, just like this piece, wow, I've got something really powerful here to share that I've created. But often creativity can be sneaking in. It can be a little more sheepish. I recall my early days in the recording studio when I was a teenager. We had a very talented songwriter who would, under a lot of pressure indeed, but he'd bring in a song, and it wasn't that, oh, I've got this big hit here, that's going to be a great song. Instead, it was more sheepish. Let me share this with you. What do you think? And with that kernel of an idea, we'd work on it. He'd take it back and redo something, work on more verses, and together we'd use our tool sets to craft the song. You know, there's another way of thinking about creativity that is an incorrect image in my mind. In the conservatory areas, we often think of, or we may think of the artist as being aloof or sophisticated or nose in the air, the snobby artiste, if you will. And that can make us think of music and creativity as being all neatly packaged. But we know that the creativity is real more messy business, if we want to use the old cliche, that is getting down into the weeds, that creativity from the gut. I like to think of Beethoven, for example, a quintessential adventurer in music making, breaking new ground. And what was Beethoven's life like? Well, you have the image right away of Beethoven's manuscript scattered around his studio, the spilled ink and empty cups of coffee, and half-eaten plates of macaroni. Oh, certainly Beethoven has had his thousands of hours of practice, so he's well developed with that toolkit, but he's in the messy business of creating. And he moves back and forth between taking a walk with his notebook, collecting inspiration, and then moving back to his studio and working with his tools to craft. So this is an interesting dichotomy, playing again what we talked to earlier about having the insight of creativity, but working on that insight with the toolkit. Now, one might ask, creativity, and you're saying creativity from the gut. This is what we're hypothesis here, or our working theory. But isn't creativity a right brain activity? So let's look at that. I think it's worth looking at this lateralization of the brain, because there's been a lot of pop psychology talk back in the 60s about left brain being analytical, right brain being the creative source. And then neuroscientists and psychologists kind of poo-pooed that for a while, and that was no longer in vogue. But then about 10 years ago, we started to see in the pop stream again, drawing on the right side of the brain. I'd like to share some of the current research on that, because with the ability to scan the brain and really look at neurological structures, we have more evidence of what's really going on with these hemispheres. And it may be interesting here as musicians and as creative artists. I'd like to refer to the work of my friend Elhonen Goldberg. He's a Russian neuroscientist who posits that the right brain, the one that we think of creative, is processing novelty. So things that are new tend to be processed in the right brain, whereas where we're expert, our routines, things we've done over and over, tend to be more processed in the left brain. So when we think of our skill set as a musician, we're doing things over and over. We're practicing scales. We have little riffs that just seem to flow out of our fingers. And so what we do time and again gets enriched and routinized in that left brain, but we're in a new scenario, something where we can't relate it to the tried and true. That's processed in the right brain. I think that's quite fascinating and quite workable. Another author you may be interested in is Ian McGilchrist, and his work on a book called The Master and His Emissary. I had the privilege of meeting with him in England, and again talking about creativity, comparing Goldberg's work with McGilchrist. And he suggests that we orient ourselves on that right brain. So our situated self is really in that here and now and right brain, and we dip into utilizing our tool set. But sometimes what happens is we build expertise, we start to live inside of our zone of expertise. In other words, we live into the four walls of our routine. So I recommend that we want to break out of that routine and be dipping into it, but not being constrained within it. We might think in terms of a goal would be to cross-lateralize or cross-talk between these two brain hemispheres. And indeed, in my earlier times, I would talk often about that we're involved with the study of music, and music being right brain and study being reflecting on, that we're adding more neural connections across that corpus callosum, which is the cable network that connects right and left brain hemispheres. And there's probably something positive and true about that. But what's really interesting and a little bit unusual, I guess one would say, is that if we analyze the channel of that corpus callosum, it's not just connective tissues to have crosstalk, but there's actually inhibitory neurons and chemical reactions that inhibit the crosstalk. Isn't that interesting? So intuitively we say we want more connection, but what does nature do for us? It actually inhibits those connections, so that the right brain can operate at times more independently of the left brain, and vice versa. And this is possibly a very good trait of the human species for us to learn and invent new things, to not get stuck in a rut, and when we need that expertise, to have it fully available. You know, in some ways, I reflect on my years in Nashville, and the idea of the innocence of creativity is something that I saw often of new songwriters coming into Nashville. A lot of optimism, and sometimes with some great ideas. But over time, it seems to be that the professionals, the experts that have written hundreds of songs, they're the ones that have the secure profession. And that difference there is in that the expert, the professional, has built up that repertoire of craft and skills, a tool set to dip into. So not just relying only on inspiration, but can work the tools around the inspiration. That reminds me of the stories of Neil Diamond. He'd be in his airplane flying somewhere with in his travels from the airport to another airport, and everyone else in the plane is watching movies. And where is Neil Diamond? He's sitting there with his pad of paper writing lyrics, and not just inspired lyrics, but scratching out, rewriting, revising. So we get the inspiration and we get the craft of that hard work. That's the intertwining that we want to look at. So in summary, then, there's a strong dichotomy, if you will, of inspiration, and what I like to say, inspired from the gut, if you will, with our brain bypass, but then the processes of not just building our toolkit, but dipping in and utilizing that toolkit. And we get a crosstalk and on and off, sometimes fully one direction, sometimes fully the other, and sometimes weaving them together. Perhaps we can illustrate that at the piano with a little simpler context. Let's bring out some Bach, a Bach First Prelude in C. Okay, just that opening, those opening bars, there's a simplicity here, isn't there? We've got our C major chord, our third is right up there on the top, almost has a melody, and then it steps up to the next higher note, and then underneath, and back again. So we could think of this as playing out this one chord, and then the 5, and so forth. But we see how we've done there is we've taken, understanding the tools, we've taken some routines in my fingers and simply extrapolated it out in different ways. That comes from the patterns, and yet we have an inspiration from either an external idea, or we could dip into something that's even more out of the box. But you can imagine how each musician may handle this in different ways. A jazz pianist may right away go, oh, that D minor chord, the second chord was the 2 chord, and then we get the 5 and 1. So it may put a little jazz slant on it. Or the lounge pianist may put this with the major 7th and the 9th. Maybe you like that major 7 sound, but we don't want it quite as overt here over the top, and maybe we want to make it a little edgier. How about if we put the 7th underneath? That's an interesting sound, so we might. Or perhaps you want to be even more edgy. How do we get even more edgy than this? Well, we could take our chord and just simply alter a tone. So what if we move up to this G sharp? Let's be more haunting here. In other words, we can dive into whichever toolkit we want, or we turn off our toolkit and we just see what emerges. We have to think in that creativity that often of not right and wrong, but exploration. That exploration will take us to new expressive depth. I'd like to summarize a bit then. We have our tool set and we have inspiration. And what we do in Piano Adventures is we give a curriculum that builds that tool set. In other words, if you're a musician and you need to learn more on your scales and harmony, our Piano Adventures scale and chord books, especially 2 and 3, can be wonderful ones for learning harmony, viewing the scales and the keys in different ways, finding little patterns in the scales, transposing them, and working through chord progressions in various keys. Or if you want to dig into reading music and that's something you haven't explored yet, our Adult Piano Adventures course may be just the right books for you. Or if you've explored a little bit of reading in the past and you need to brush up, Adult Piano Adventures Book 2. Also want to highlight for some of you keyboardists, some of you would like to just be able to get around the keyboard with more speed and control and fluency. Check out our faberpiano.com for our Technique and Artistry video series, as well as the Technique and Artistry books. We have a new book called Hannon Faber. You've probably heard of the Hannon exercises. The Hannon Faber book takes a very different twist on that, more efficiency video showing how to use the wrist and the hands and the arms in combination for more proficient playing. We talk often in Piano Adventures about developing musical minds and hearts. The musical mind is that fluid movement between those hemispheres. From the heart is the expression. And what we looked at today was making music from the gut, that creativity. So think of patterns in the brain, technique in the fingers, and that musical expression, creative expression from the gut. Let's turn this over now to you and some questions that you may have. We have a few minutes left. And Amy, would you like to come on and help facilitate? Amy, I'm having trouble hearing you. Would you just double check?
Sure. Now I think it's
Thank
better. I haven't seen any questions come up just yet, but I am keeping tabs on our chats and just want to thank you on behalf of Hal Leonard for doing this today. We really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. And my thanks to you and to DJ for the wonderful introduction, to Hal Leonard and Hal Leonard team, as well as those at NAMM for making this possible.
Absolutely.
You know, one question that comes up from people quite often is, you know, a scale or a key signature. What's the significance of a key signature, and how do I know? Do I have to know what scale tone I'm using when I'm creating? And I just would like to share with you just a little, you know, insight of, you know, each scale step has this function or expression relative to its home note. So if we're in the key of C, for instance, that C is anchoring, and that fifth tone is really dominant, right? So that's what we call it, the dominant. It's the powerful 5. And on that dominant here, you can explore and go outside of your scale much more than when we're on our 1. So on our 1 chord, maybe we're going to be a little more cautious of staying away from those half steps here. But with that 5, now not only using any scale steps, but drifting away on the 5. So just some little ideas like that can be helpful in terms of stimulating some creativity.
So we have a question from Madeline. What are the names of the books using the chord progression?
That would be specifically Piano Adventures Scale and Chord Book 2, and then again in 3. So it just depends on how proficient you are. There's a lot of exercises and transpositions in both of those. And so I encourage you to take a look at both. But both of them weave through patterns in keys and taking that pattern through many keys. And that's where we incorporate the chord progressions based on that tonal set of the tones of your scale. So it's a great integration there that I think you'll find helpful. Hey, I wanted to just to share something quickly. Our editor in Germany just shared with us a video link, a little preview of our Beethoven.com, our Beethoven.pianoadventures.com website. And I thought I'd share that with you just for a moment, shall we? Because Beethoven being the quintessential adventurer in music making, I think you'll find this inspirational. Would you be able to click that forward for us? Just need a little audio. Well, that was at the, if we get that audio up, we'll play that for you again. It's Beethoven.pianoadventures.com.
Welcome to Beethoven Independent Man, a website with a fun way to do some online learning about this great composer. This site, presented by Faber Piano Adventures, was created last year in celebration of Beethoven's 250th birthday. On the site, you'll find 8 biographical stories and corresponding search and discover activities. The stories take you through the various stages of Beethoven's life, beginning in the city of Bonn, where he was born and spent his boyhood, and ending in Vienna, where his funeral was attended by over 10,000 mourners. They're put together in a storybook fashion with photographs, artistic illustrations, and historical paintings of important people and places in Beethoven's life and development. And they're told in a way that you feel like you're there as events are unfolding. At the end of each story, you'll find a featured performance with listening suggestions. The search and discover sections include extra fun facts and anecdotes, and they address even unexpected aspects of the composer's life, like why he wore such bulky coats with big pockets, or who was this mystery woman to whom he dedicated his famous Für Elise? What did his pianos look like? Click on a red link and you'll find even more images and scores, serious or fun videos, and just maybe a long rabbit hole you never expected to go down when reading about a composer. There's more listening too. Piano music, chamber music, musical jokes, symphonies. A great all-round introduction to Beethoven's revolutionary music and his life as an independent man. The site is free for all and is intended for students and teachers of all sorts, as well as for any music lovers interested in a fun way to dive in and learn a little, or a lot, about Beethoven. Come and take a look at beethoven.pianoadventures.com.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Amy, and our producers there. I appreciate that. You know, before we sign off for today, I did see a question pop up. How do I learn to improvise was the question. That's a great question, you know, because often traditional teachers maybe aren't so proficient in improvising themselves. So it's difficult then for them to share how best to learn to improvise. I'm going to just share a couple thoughts. One is that over the course of this next year, we're going to pick up a theme called creative improv. So if you go to the pianoadventures.com site, watch my blogs and watch the video blogs, because we're going to give some specific tools. Just as we did over the last couple of years, we had technique and artistry as a theme, and we put out about 150 videos on technique. The next wave will be around creative improv, and you may indeed find that as an improvisation course. But you can always dig into a little section of a piece, just maybe the motif or an introduction or an ending, some element of a piece that you like, and then start inverting the chords, playing within the scale set. And sometimes people forget that, you know, a key signature is just establishing a set of tones like a painting palette. And as long as you're staying in that palette, you're really feeling pretty safe, you see. And then if you want to go a little bit outside of that scale, that's where we expand the palette. So ultimately, we may have a 7-tone scale, but if we know how to use different tones, we can veer outside that to a broader palette. But start your improvisations by staying in the tones of your key signatures, tones of your major scale, or take away the half steps. That gives us the pentatonic scale. I'll share more on that in some of the upcoming videos, but that reduces the number of tones available, which makes it almost impossible to make a mistake. And that could be a good training wheels to get you started. Someone's asking, can a not-for-profit school connect with the Piano Adventures to learn more about the Beethoven site? Indeed, the Beethoven site is free. We're so grateful for the Bonn Museum and many not-for-profit organizations that have helped contribute resources to the site. So there's no charge, and simply go to beethoven.pianoadventures.com. It's free to use and share. It's a resource for the community. And I hope for each of you, it's a resource for inspiration of your own creativity and musical expression. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you at pianoadventures.com. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Amy.